it's Clarity. This is part 2 of the free flow energy system. I recorded part 1 sitting down, but this time I'm going to be standing up to give you a better understanding of where these centers are placed on our body. As well, I'm changing the name of the free flow energy system just a tiny bit. I am now calling it just Free Flow Chakra. I feel part of myself was fighting the term chakra to try and make it stand out more, but at its core, it is using a lot of the same ideas, energy centers, just guiding them all through a dynamic set of channels, and in a system that allows free flow. So the perineum is located, let's say this is the spine, tailbone right here. The perineum is located just in front of the tailbone. It's also the area called the gooch. Just that area between our back and our front, that perfect center bottom point of our torso. This one center is the birthplace of all of our life force energy. And as I read this in the system, it has another major attribute. I like to imagine we have our right hip and our left hip, and that pelvic floor and our hips create almost a bowl. This perineum is hovering right above this bowl, constantly filling this bowl with energy. So to read the perineum, I look at how much energy is saved up in this pelvic floor bowl. I also look at how much is being put into there, and then the perineum itself, what it looks like and how it's interacting in this bowl space. So when it comes to channeling, you can of course always start with yourself. We want to imagine this bowl and a ball around right here pouring energy into the bowl. So let's say the life force energy in this pelvic floor area is shallow. This entire perineum pelvic floor area is home to a lot of stuck emotions. And all of the emotions in this area are all friends of the one emotion, shame. So when our life force energy is very shallow in this area, it's usually out of fear of producing more energy. There's some deep internal construct restricting how much we allow ourselves to have. And this also connects to guilt, regret, and a few other emotions that get jumbled up in there. And sometimes the level of energy is a bit too high. It almost starts drowning the perineum. This is found in a lot of people where instead of their reaction to do less in response to trauma, their response is to do more in reaction to the trauma. There's an over-supplementation and a constant push, where these people aren't giving themselves a break. And that's just reading the level of energy within that bowl. The perineum itself, this nice ball that's found around right here, this ball has a certain color based on what kind of energy it's producing. And that color tells you where that energy is coming from. Sometimes we're creating energy using fuel that isn't just our life force, that isn't just our spiritual will, but are things like fear and shame. Let me tell you, entire religions have been built off of the energy of shame and fear. These are very powerful energies. They provide a lot of fuel, but they are not healthy to incessantly run through our bodies. So by understanding what kind of energy is being pumped through the rest of our body, we can start at the start. Change the energy you're feeding yourself, and you'll change the rest of your energy. Another important thing to note within this space is how the energy circulates. Energy has a nice spiral motion, so the energy all up in our hips is constantly swirling through this bowl. Sometimes the energy is just still. When the energy is still, it means it's being held. There's this pressure, this tenseness constantly in the hips. If you ever wonder why everyone's hips hurts, it's because we hold some pretty gnarly emotions in there. So through observing this perineum, viewing which side of the body it's on, and a few more fine details, this perineum tells us how much energy we're producing for our body and what's fueling our body. Is it shame? Is it fear? Is it guilt? Or is it just soul? Now the next step up from the perineum goes up the spine, and it stops at the top of our pelvic bone as the spine keeps going up. So the next energy center is called the sacrum. It's like the sacral in the front of the pelvis, but it's right before the spine kind of splits off from our hips. This is the thing that pumps this life force energy up and through our body. This is where we hold the emotions of guilt and internal expectation. This sacral pump is very correlated to the rest of this kind of bull we got in our hips right here and the other emotions held in it. If we have regrets or guilt, we just won't feed ourselves the energy. And that's why this is so important. That drive that sends this energy up through our body, lets us partake of our own energy, might just not. And through doing somatic work and other healing work with this system, you can remove those emotions, allowing for a beautiful, free flow. For the rest of this reading, assume as I guide up my body with my hands, I'm referencing the back of my body. So as our life force moves up our spine, around right here, the channel splits off of our spine and guides to our adrenal glands. Each adrenal gland has its own center, and each adrenal gland has a set motion of spin. These also have channels that connect to the front, which is then our solar plexus. Our solar plexus tends to hold that emotional fear, while our kidneys tend to hold that physical fear. And these two centers communicate very often. Fear is throughout this entire band of our body. But aside from just fear, it's also where we hold other portions of our drive. These are the things that tell us how much energy we need for what, if we should overspend or underspend. When there's something wrong in the adrenal centers, it's typically because of a lack of balance. One will be moving a lot faster than the other, or they'll both be moving slower or way too fast. In the case that one is moving aggressively faster than the other, it's a sign of overcompensation, having to push something a bit further for a point of validation or a point of protection. And then from that split where we have these two adrenal glands, they move right back to center and just up a bit until it reaches our upper back, which is our back heart space. Unlike the front of this system where we have the heart, the liver, and the lung channels, this is just one singular heart space. And while this is our projected self in the front, this is our past self. This is how we're growing. This is the cultivation, the nurture, the protection of who we are. I talked about it in the last video, how there's internal dimensions in some of these centers. And with this space, there is the heart garden. In this heart garden, there are 3 separate gardens. On one side is the center for our self-love. On the other side is the center for our love for friends and family, and in this last garden is the center for how we love the world itself. By going into this internal dimension, you can get a symbolic view of your love for yourself, your love for your close ones, and the love for everyone else. There is a lot of emotions that end up getting stored and processed in this back heart space. Not only do we hold a lot of boundaries, but when there is a plant that we need to remove energy, we need to get out of our life, it all has to be removed from this garden. When we pour love into something and we have to remove it from us, it's removing a part of ourselves with it. But through doing healing procedures in this back heart space, you can get a clean, beautiful, healthy garden that is entirely for you and your growth. Now moving up from this back heart garden, we have the back throat chakra. Rather than spoken language, this is our body language. And it also has channels that guide all the way down the arms to our fingers and out into the world. Not only is this the major center for how we move, it's also the major center for how we create and express. So as I read this center, it's not just the health of the center, how vocal we allow ourselves to be with our body, how we take up space. I also read the channels as they move down the arms to see how creatively open we are. An important thing to know, with all of the emotions from this perineum, our adrenals, and up, a lot of the time, the energy filling these arms will be one of protection. As our arms are our one protector of all of these vital organs, sometimes they're not available to create because they're too busy protecting. And you can read it in the channels. The energy starts to get cut off at around the wrist and all the way to the fingers because those aren't the things protecting you. Your arms are. As we open up the energy in us to flow freely from our wrists to our fingers, it opens up a lot more ability to create. And not the energy or concept of creating, but the actual act of that live expression and that live creation. Now the system gets a little funky after this back throat part. Rather than moving up to the back of our head into the third eye, there is another split in channels. From the back throat space, those channels split and they reach the ears. Our ears are, of course, sensory organs. Super powerful ones at that. Everything we hear creates a cord between the thing we heard and who we heard it from. All of this information that we have up in our head There's just thousands of cords all around our ears connecting and associating what we know to who we knew it from. As you tune in to the channels passing by the ears, you'll be able to detect things you've heard and things you're held on to that weren't from you, things you've heard that have just stayed stuck. By doing proper channel clearing and cord cutting, you're able to remove some of the false beliefs you've heard from the world. There's also some blocks that might happen here energetically when there are things we're not willing to hear. And by becoming more open-minded and clearing that which we're not ready to hear, we can allow more energy through to become a more unified self. And then that channel passes by to the eyes before it reaches our third eye. Eyes, of course, are a very powerful sensory organ. If you want to know more about how the eyes work as energy centers, feel free to reference back to part 1. And there's one more major channel I want to cover. This major channel isn't directly in the back or front of our bodies, but kind of center. Directly in the center of our own head is an energy center. This energy center is about where our pituitary gland is. And this center is something that's very unique to just humans, and there's a specific reason why. Most animals have one center between their third eye and their pituitary gland. The reason humans have two separate centers is because we have created and developed an ego that stands separately from our own intrinsic self. There's an actual gap, a split between who we are and how we identify. If you look at the energy centers in primates, dolphins, and other mammals, you'll be able to observe that there is only one energy center because there hasn't been that full split of how the self identifies. And it's interesting because there is no direct channel to this center point, but you can reach it through the third eye. It is only by removing our identity that we find more of who we actually are. This internal center is where we get things like downloads, where it's not just divine inspiration, but it is something placed there by some entity. It is that bam download moment. But if our third eye is too much in the way, we're not going to get the download. It's just going to stay stuck here until we can allow it space to thrive within our third eye space. And before we wrap up, I want to cover 2 other channels that I didn't mention quite yet. From this sacrum point around right here in the back, there are 2 channels that split off and trace just above our hips, right here. These channels are where we store a lot of backup emotions. When we can't fit it all in our hips, we put them in these channels to try and fit even more into our hips. When these channels are blocked or filled up with emotions, it reduces our mobility and can cause certain pains. So a lot of this energy is going to be a lot of the energy we kind of carry around with us daily. The energy back here, deep in the perineum, is the energy that we really repress, the stuff we don't even see ourselves. By observing the back space, you are able to view a lot more deep, repressed, and hidden things, but also a lot of the things that allow us to grow, nurture, and develop even better. Please feel free to go check out my website. I have a bit more information, and I also teach classes teaching you how to not just navigate it on your own, but also navigate other people's energy systems. By navigating these energy systems, we're not only able to do divination, telling people deep things about their own selves, helping guide them, but we're also able to facilitate healing on a much more specific and beautiful level, bringing energy work and somatic work into one field of healing. If you have any questions about the system that aren't answered here on my website, please feel free to comment them below. If you enjoy the alchemy, I'll be sharing a few other systems that I work with on the daily. And with that, I say these things with light, love, and clarity. Thank you for watching.